don't subscribe to the old school way, nor the new school way, only the optimal way. The 80-20 Baseball Experience with Coach Bo.
Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all having an enjoyable day. This is Coach Bo with 80-20 Baseball, and we're going to get right into it. In this episode, you'll learn first 5 questions that you will use or can use to help you decide if new advice, new information, or a new product or a new service is worth your time, energy, or money. So 5 questions that you can ask yourself to see if new information, a new product, a new service is worth your time, energy, or money. Second part we're going to talk about today, we'll discuss how players benefit more from feeling it out than they do from talking and thinking it out. And I'll share with you the 4 pre-training points that should be shared with the team before any drill or activity. Number 3, I'll share with you 5 specific examples clearly illustrating the old school coaches were a lot further along with their knowledge than the contemporary narrative within the baseball community would like us to believe, or would maybe lead us to believe, I should say. Number 4, we're going to discuss how we can benefit from mirrors as live feedback and some places where they come in super handy during our training sessions. And we'll finish up at the end with a bonus tip that I'm putting in here at the end, a very short but very effective and productive and useful bonus tip, and we'll get to that at the end. All right, let's get right into it here. The first discussion point, don't let complexity entice you, and don't let simplicity bore you. Don't let complexity entice you, and don't let simplicity bore you. Simplicity is not hip. It's not something that's like super flashy, but it's a vital part to optimal success. It's highly effective. On the contrary, complexity can appear on the surface as cool and flashy, yet it stalls progress. Avoid complexity at all costs. Don't get enticed by the complexity. Simplify and streamline everything down to the bare bones. Now remember, bare bones is a good thing. You're getting rid of all the unnecessary energy expenditure and focus expenditures and things that don't add much value or any value at all, and you're going to streamline everything down to the bare bones. And that involves methods, strategies, products that you use, and things like that. So great coaches and great players have a very common theme. They value simplicity and avoid complexity at all costs. They understand that more is not always more, and more is not always better, and in many cases, less. Not necessarily less in numbers, but less in the breadth, the width of those individual strategies and techniques and things that go on within the game of baseball. Less within that, and simplifying those strategies and those things that we're teaching, the techniques and the swing and the pitching, mechanics, delivery, and base running and signs and plays and bunt defenses and first and thirds, and then all the products that we have in our toolbox, all the things that we're using to get our players better. So it's not necessarily the number of those, although it is, but also to what extent you use each one of those and to what extent you kind of spread each one of those out. When it comes to the marketplace, like I talked about with products and services, a simple solution and a simple vanilla answer just doesn't sound cool, and they definitely don't sell as easy. They don't sell as easily. They may be optimal, but they lack sizzle. So a simple solution lacks sizzle out on the marketplace. That goes with anything in the world, not just in the baseball world. But a simple solution, something that's so vanilla, it lacks sizzle. And in the marketplace, complexity, it creates sizzle, or it can create some perceived sizzle. More complexity creates more perceived paths to success. So more complexity starts to create. So there are people that unknowingly and maybe knowingly out there, not just in baseball, but in the world, that add complexity to a problem. So it creates more paths to success. So there may be, so it creates these kind of this unnecessary kind of this artificial need for these different products and services. Complexity also works to bury the optimal answers, thus slowing our arrival at the root solution. This is a widespread occurrence, not just like I said throughout society, but you see it in baseball, and we need to get rid of complexities first. I think it's so important that as coaches and as players, we first look to assess what we're doing with our training, with our teaching, with our strategies before we look to add anything to it. Before we look to add, let's optimize, let's simplify what we have. And also, maybe even before that, you sit back and you go, do I even need any of this? Or how much is this moving the needle? And simplicity does not have the sizzle. Complexity has more sizzle. But when you simplify things down, they're just going to be much more effective and much more useful. So don't get enticed by complexity and big words and all this stuff and things like that and all these extra things. And complexity can come in the form of volume too. Remember, simplicity is a key. So don't let simplicity bore you and kind of turn you off. So here's one way to help you, or I should say 5 ways. These are 5 questions that you can ask yourself anytime you hear new advice or see a new product or a new strategy or a new service that's out there. Number 1, is this solution, ask yourself this, is this solution solving a symptom or a root issue? I can't tell you how many times in the baseball world and just, look at like a simple example in life is like Advil and Tylenol. Now that stuff does help with the symptom. Absolutely. I think for most people, you take a painkiller like that or a pain reliever, it's going to help with the symptom, but it's not necessarily going to solve the root issue. If you got a broken leg, it's not necessarily going to solve it. Now time may solve it, but the doctor also may help in surgery, things like that. But the Tylenol is kind of helping the symptom. Now, when it comes to pain relief and things like that, it's kind of, sometimes that's needed, sometimes it's not. But in baseball, if you're fixing a symptom, you're not addressing the root issue. So in pitching or hitting, you see this a lot with hitting swings and batter swings and pitching deliveries. They're working on things, especially up high, the arm, the shoulder, the torso, and things like that. But really, most of the time, I should say, a lot of the time, those root issues are lower. They're down at the feet, the knees, the hips, especially in that hip range and in that area down there. So solving the symptom is not what we want to do. We want to solve the root issue. So when you hear a product or a service or a strategy or a new technique, is it solving a symptom or is it solving the root issue? Number 2, is this training or is this exercise that you're being taught or you're hearing about, is it a redundancy? Is it something that's just repeating something you're already doing? All right, and that's just adding volume and complexity to your workout, which is unnecessary. Number 3, does it help prevent my opponents or your opponents from scoring? And if so, to what degree? Does it help keep your opponents from scoring more? And if so, what degree does it move the needle? Or should I say, keep the needle from moving in terms of your opponent's score? Number 4, will this product or service address the number 1 goal you have as an offense? Will it increase your team's run production? And if so, how much? How much will it move the needle? Adding things that don't move the needle much is adding simply complexity without much return on the investment. And lastly, the 5th question you can ask yourself in regards to tech products, the question should go, does this give information to me? Does this give information to you that will be a true needle mover? There's a lot of great technology out there and there's a lot of information out there. There's so much data you can collect from these machines and these computers and systems, but how much of it is just noise and how much of it is it something that's going to move the needle? How much of it do you really need to know? And that's important, and we're going to get into that in another episode. But I also want you to keep in mind that at the end of the day, the only stat that truly matters is the runs your team scores or the runs that you help your team produce and the runs that you help or you help prevent your opponents from scoring. Those are the only 2 numbers that really matter at the end of the day. Sure, there's a lot of substats that add into that. I get it, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, is this tech product going to help move the needle in terms of the scoreboard? And again, when coaches and colleges and professional scouts are looking at a player, they got to be asking that same question. If they're not doing their job very well. They should be looking at a player. It should simply be, does this player help his team score more runs, and how much so does he do that? And does this player help reduce the other teams or prevent the other team from scoring runs? That's why WAR is such a big statistic. It's based around wins, runs, and wins. It's really based around runs, and then they factor that into wins. All right, moving on to the second topic of this episode. The title, 90% feel it out, 10% talk it out. Great coaches understand the importance of avoiding a lecture and an advice-filled environment. They instead create an environment that allows the players to correctly feel it out at a high volume of reps, quality reps, so that it becomes closer to automatic. A high volume of quality reps will train the players in the most productive way, while much of the conventional coaching, i.e. an excessive amount of talking. Now remember, I'm generalizing here, of course. I know there's coaches, some of you guys are doing an awesome job with this. You're letting the kids practice, you're letting them rep it out. But the conventional coaching model is a lot of talking, a lot of cueing, and making players think through every movement and action. And it's almost by design to have the players trained by thinking, like I said. And this will in all likelihood increase rigidity and slowness in the players' movements. Training the subconscious is what we want. We want to make it automatic. We can do this by automating the quality movement and skills so that they are deeply ingrained rather than needing to be thought through. Quality, authentic reps followed by quality, authentic reps followed by more quality, authentic reps is what players need most. So shoot for a 90-10 ratio, 90% action, 10% talk. Of course, the ratio does not need to be exactly 90-10. Each training drill will have a different requirement and each team will be different and the environment will be a little different depending on your where you're at, where you're practicing and what you're doing, but it's a number to shoot for. So for a 30-minute drill, again, this is just, I'm just throwing out a solid even number 30-minute drill, there will be approximately 3 minutes of dedicated talk time and 27 minutes of action, high quality rep time. So think to yourself, when you did your last 30 plus or minus minute drill, was it just 3 minutes of talk and was it 27 minutes of action, or were you stopping and talking? Were you taking breaks and was the drill moving slowly, or were they getting 27 minutes of fast, efficient, quality, authentic reps? And again, I'm not saying you don't say anything for the 27 minutes, but as the drill's moving along, you can throw in a few pointers here and there, but the key is to not stop the drill and make them think too much. A few cues, a few reminders here and there is okay, in my opinion. This ratio of 90-10 may be more like 80-20 early on when, you're introducing a new drill or going through the trials of a new drill. So for that, in that particular instance, 80-20 would be like, say, 6 minutes of a 30-minute drill. So it's 6 minutes to introduce a drill and then 24 to 25 minutes of action. It is important, I believe, like I said, to preface each new drill with key information, and I think 6 minutes is more than enough time to concisely share these these next 4 pre-drill points with your team. 6 minutes, I think I would set a timer, and your goal should be to introduce a new drill in 5 minutes or less. To get that done effectively and efficiently, you're going to have to script it out. You're going to have to at least have some bullet points, and I think setting a timer is not a bad way to go. When the timer goes off, you should have been done already. If not, wrap it up and get to the drill. Here are the 4 pre-drill points that I think should be covered with the team. Now, these are 4 I'm not saying it has to be exactly 4. If you have something that fits in with your team at the particular point in time when you're putting the drill in or the training activity in, then yeah, obviously you can adjust this. But here are 4 pre-drill points that I think you should make with your team. Number 1, the why. Why the team and the players will benefit from the drill come game time. Number 2, how the drill should look and play out. What is one key thing the players should do while they're doing the drill? What is one thing they should focus on? And what's one key that's going to be the biggest needle mover while doing the drill? And number 4, what is the main thing or the main safety issue that the players should look to avoid? So I think it's important that there's very minimal points that you're trying to get the players to focus on, or should I say aspects of the drill. I think they can feel the rest of it out, but I do think it's important to sell the why the team will benefit come game time. And this can be done quickly. If you get long-winded when you're giving the why to your team, it starts to sound like you're rationalizing in this, and kids start to see this as you're not sure, you're a little shaky with your commitment to the why. Maybe there's a little shakiness to your belief in the why. Be concise. Don't be arrogant. Be concise and sell it to them why it's going to help them come game time and how it's going to benefit them. And be specific and maybe give examples of how that looks in a major league games or with players that they know well. Going over to the second part here again, the drill should look and play out a certain way, and the players should know how it should look and play out. Now, again, don't spend much time on this. Just give them kind of a mental template of how it should look, because they're gonna figure it out once they start going and once you set it up. Third, one specific key that the players should be focusing on during the drill. The one key that you think will be the biggest needle mover. Number 4, what is the main thing or the main safety issue that they should look to avoid. So what's the one thing that is the more maybe a very common mistake that is something that happens often in a game situation and causes or costs a team the most amount of, the most often in terms of runs and errors. So what's the one thing they want to avoid? And then more importantly, I think is a safety thing. I really think it's important to focus on positive, productive things rather than on what not to do. It's kind of like a pitcher sitting there going, hey, don't hit the bull, don't hit the bull, don't hit the bull, and then you hit the bull, don't throw a ball, and you throw a ball, right? I think we want to keep our mental frame of mind in on a positive track as best as possible. But I do think throwing in something like maybe a safety issue concern is good. All right, moving on. Part 3, players and coaches of old probably deserve more credit. Now, again, I'm not an old school, new school guy. I'm about the optimal way. The old school way, new school way, it doesn't matter to me. All I care is that players get the best from the coaches that they can and the best baseball that can be done. And I think baseball can be improved in a lot of ways, but I don't think there's a lot of new wisdom to be learned. I think it's how we put it together and how we prioritize and how we optimize it. With that said, I frequently read on social media, I frequently hear on podcasts, and I frequently read on baseball articles a narrative that portrays the old school baseball world as a bunch of dunces. And I'm generalizing here, and not everybody who's a newer coach is saying, all this stuff that's kind of put downish towards old school coaches. But the game of baseball and the baseball community, there's a narrative that baseball coaches, there's a narrative kind of being going around and pushed around and kind of talked about that old school baseball was, full of a bunch of aloof players and coaches that just didn't have any clue how to play the game, and that it's finally being solved now by a group of new, young, intellectual coaches. But when I step back and look at it, I go, I've heard of very few original organic ideas derived within the past 10 or 15 years. So, hey, I'm a fan of all coaches, new, young, cotton tops, it doesn't matter. I'm a fan of quality coaching. But when I hear young coaches call old school coaches outdated and elementary and, kind of out of touch, and then they themselves turn around, those young coaches turn around and pawn off old school ideas, they repackage it, and then they pawn those old school ideas off as new and innovative, or maybe they don't even repackage it. Maybe it's just they're naive to the fact that it was already a part of baseball and it was already a strategy or a technique or things to use well before we came along, and they pawn it off as new and innovative, and to me that just doesn't add up. So my guess is young coaches would be very surprised to know that most of their newly discovered wisdom was likely to have been figured out years and years ago. Well, I guess you could probably say that about any aspect of life when you think about it. When I first started coaching, I myself would self-discover things that worked well. These are things that I had not heard from any other coaches or in the baseball community, but only later did I find out down the road that those strategies were around long before I was even born, much less coaching. Learning that I was late to the coaching party was a lot like the time I was super bummed when I found out the instrumentals to the song Ice Ice Baby weren't OG beats, but in fact just a straight up copy, a straight up ripoff of Queen's Under Pressure. I listened to Ice Ice Baby this was in junior high and late elementary school. I listened to Ice Ice Baby for a couple years, and it was I loved those instrumentals, especially that opening. And the whole time I had no idea that very track had originated years before. Well, I'm older now, and along with those grays starting to pop up everywhere, I'm also starting to see the originals I grew up with start to get knocked off for what that's worth. Now, it's true that we can definitely do more with the baseball knowledge now. We can spread it, show it, share it much wider, much faster, and in much cooler ways with computer, social media, internet, podcasts, YouTube. Although that awesome contemporary progress in and of itself does not mean the knowledge being put forth today is original. And if we understand that much of the knowledge about baseball was discovered years ago, we can then study up on it. We can look to find it and avoid making the same mistakes that were made and discovered and worked through years and years ago, and expedite our learning curve. I think it's important. This is my point of this whole thing, is that we can learn from this. If we think everything needs to be discovered now and that we're just figuring out the game of baseball, we are wasting all that 150 years plus or minus of baseball wisdom that came before us. In the game of baseball, and I've said this in other podcasts, the game of baseball is not like a lot of other parts of life. It's not like this blank canvas of technology and things like that. There are strict parameters on the game of baseball, the rules, the dimensions, the angles, things like that, the player's body, physics, laws of physics. There's things that just cannot be changed and haven't changed over time for the most part, if any, just maybe a sliver here and there. But a lot of these things haven't changed. And the dimensions and the angles and things like I talked about, the laws of physics, it makes it so that what they learned 100 years ago or what they discovered these coaches and players learned 50 years ago and 30 years ago is still applicable today. And I think it should be something that we keep in mind so we don't sit around and, waste our time trying to discover things that really have already been discovered for the most part. I do want to, one caveat to that would be like in the medical part of baseball, the medical industry of baseball. I think that is definitely got and definitely making a lot of progress. There's a lot to learn in the medical and health part of baseball and also in the training part of baseball. So when it comes to things off the field, I think there's a lot more ability for us. There's a lot more room for growth. There's a lot more knowledge that we can seek, and there's a lot more knowledge and information out there. But when it comes to like strategies and technique, teaching techniques and things like that on the field, I don't think that stuff there's not much room left that hasn't already been figured out. So to give some specific examples of what I'm talking about and to illustrate that new mainstream ideas are actually just retreads of old baseball wisdom, I'm going to give you 5 examples right here. Ted Williams talked about launch angle. He's on video talking about getting the ball up in the air, not up in the air like pop-ups, but hitting the ball with a little bit of an angle up. He was saying that 40 years ago. So Ted Williams was talking about launch angle 40 years ago. Lou Boudreau was a manager back in the 40s, and I'm talking 75 years ago, and he was shifting his defense. There are pictures of him shifting his defense, ironically against Ted Williams and, among other players, but against Ted Williams, he would shift, and those shifts were even more extreme than the shifts you see nowadays. Go check it out. Google it. You'll see the shifts, and you'll see where he put his guys, and they're actually in an extreme. They're further, the guys are moved further than what you see now. So shifts, those were around 75 years ago. Launch angle was being talked about 40 years ago. Branch Rickey, a man who was born literally almost in the Civil War, 1881, used statistics and not just batting average and on-base percentage, although he was a big proponent of on-base percentage way before Moneyball came around. He was talking about on-base percentage back in the 40s and was coaching up on-base percentage back in the 40s. So Moneyball came out, 2000, 2001, 2002, kind of became to the forefront of the mainstream baseball community, but he was talking about that well before any of this came about. I mean, well before even any of the Moneyball people were probably even born. So again, this all goes back to like, hey, well, let's not reinvent something that's already been invented and perfected. Again, this is stuff there are definitely some industries that can be advanced a long ways, but stuff on the field, I just don't think there's much more improvement to be done insofar as that, if we just look at a collection of all the wisdom that came before us and put it together, we'd be pretty much about 95% perfect already with understanding how to perfect the game of baseball. Now getting there and doing it and transferring it to the players, that's another ball game. But again, that's been figured out, but that's another skill in and of itself. All right, Branch Rickey used math formulas. He used math formulas. There are pictures of him using math formulas to give hitters ratings, and he actually used a stat, ISO. He called it ISO, and if you go on Fangraphs, you go on Baseball Reference may have it. If you go on this, Baseball Savant may have it. I'm a Fangraphs guy. I like Fangraphs. It's just, there's a lot of good websites. I get it, but I use Fangraphs. And if you go on there, you'll see ISO, and he was using ISO. He literally called it ISO 75 years ago, and he actually had a rating system for batters. And the sabermetricians, I should say, the people that are, the stat guys, stat people that went in and dug into kind of how, he came about and created this rating system. And they actually compared the rating system to the rating system that they use now. So they kind of back tested and they came up, and his numbers, his rankings were almost, not identical, but very similar. So he was rating players 75 years ago using statistics, in-depth statistics, and those statistics that we're using now, that we have available now, are producing very similar results that he was getting 75 years ago. All right, Nolan Ryan was throwing a weighted ball, a 1-pound ball, aka a football, 40 years ago. Now, Nolan Ryan didn't just throw the football for the weight purposes, a football being 3 times that of a baseball. He was also throwing it for a release point and instant feedback on, spiral and spin. All right, and I'm going to get into that later on. Tom House, he was highlighting, speaking of weighted baseballs, he was talking about baseballs, and he kind of brought baseballs to the forefront, weighted baseballs, that is, years before it was mainstream. So, things have kind of changed around, and now when it comes to weighted baseballs, even though the usefulness has been figured out a while back, I think it is fantastic how contemporary coaches are developing and testing thorough training routines to go along with physical products. I went over and visited Driveline. I flew over to Driveline a few weeks back, and I visited and got to see everything. I got to see all the players in action. I got to check out all their stuff. And when I saw the guys using the weighted baseballs, there's a system to it. They're testing. I think that's great. So those systems weren't in place before, but the fact that weighted baseballs were advantageous and could help a pitcher, that was something that had been figured out long before. When it comes to launch angle, even though this point has been figured out a long time ago, I think that the technology like TrackMan is great because it gives instant feedback on the launch angle and other data points. I think so. The instant feedback is great, but launch angle was around a long time ago. But I think the new tech is really making, that instant, hey, boom, I'm at 17 degrees. Boom, I'm at 28 degrees. Oh, that was, -4. Boom, that was. And a lot of times you don't really need that. You could also do it with strings and you could do it with measurements and strings and just kind of do it on your own. You don't need the TrackMan, but I do think the new tech makes it great. Instant feedback to know, how that ball's coming off your bat. Are you crushing balls at that 10 to 15 degree mark, that 20 degree mark? Are you crushing them and you hitting them hard and things like that and consistently and barreling them up? That's key. And your timing's on. Now, while Branch Rickey developed comprehensive, all-encompassing statistics a long, long time ago, the computer has allowed us to take that to a more granular level, which is really cool. So I'm guessing that and I'm not a sabermetrician, but I'm guessing that the stats now, compared to what Branch Rickey used, are definitely more granular. But I think that would mean that they're probably more accurate down to the minute, kind of smaller detail numbers, which I think is really cool. So yes, we've enhanced some of these old school ideas, but by and large, much of the game, especially on-field strategies and the valuing of correct stats, it had been figured out long ago. And now as we move forward and continue to improve baseball and improve the game of baseball, let's make sure that we are working to solve something that hasn't already been solved. We don't want to waste that time and energy. We want to find big needle movers and even small needle movers that still have room for improvement and innovation. Now for the vein, with an A that is. The fourth and final topic we will discuss is titled Mirror, Mirror on Those Walls. First and foremost, the mirror gives live feedback. It's live action. There can never be delayed feedback from a mirror. While it's hard to simultaneously look at a mirror and use a mirror to give you feedback while you're doing certain things, especially like pitching and hitting, the mirror can be very helpful to assess and feel out positioning. The mirror provides feedback instantaneously, immediately live, but it does have its limitations. All right, 4D motion analysis and things like that are going to be more useful, but they have some latency and some other things that's going to take a little bit more money and things like that, and a little more knowledge to how to use it. Here are 3 environments in which a mirror can help. In the bullpens, especially indoor mounds. This is especially useful during dry pitching, aka shadow pitching. Batting cages, behind the net, of course. This is helpful for players to see their setup and initial positioning. So it doesn't help with everything. Obviously, when they're going full speed and things like that, it's hard to watch the swing. Although if you put it in front of you, it can be helpful as you're kind of dry pitching. Obviously, not hitting and throwing into it, but you can use that if it's in front of you. Or from the side, you can see kind of where your weight is shifting and things like that and positioning. And the best location is in the strength room. This is a location that I think is the most advantageous of all of them. Mirrors all around the strength and conditioning room or your gym. And you'll see this is popular in gyms to have these in weight rooms. Quality movement is king, and the mirror will tell you in real time the quality of the movement that you're doing. And so quality of movement is king in the strength training. The mirror can easily be viewed throughout most all exercises. In fact, if I was a college or major league team or any other organization with solid financials, I would put 8-foot mirrors all the way around the training gym. Great movement. Quality movement starts in the gym. Create strong quality movement in the strength room, and many movement issues will be nipped in the bud before they even get to the field. So you want to really focus on quality movement, and what a better way than to be able to see the movement happening as you're going through it in the weight room. Now, not every exercise is going to afford you the opportunity or a player the opportunity to look in the mirror while they're doing it, but most of them do. To finish this one up, the mirror will not always be necessary, as each player is different and each training session might vary, but it can be very useful in cutting down the learning curve. And the price of mirrors makes it a reasonable purchase for most organizations. And when I say price of mirrors, like a few mirrors, a couple big mirrors here and there. Again, like I said, if I was an organization that could afford it, I would have mirrors in as many places as I could. Again, who would turn down live feedback, even if it's something you just use here and there? That live feedback is something that can help. Whether it's used a little bit or a lot of it, it's something that can definitely help. Now, before I get to my bonus tip that I got for you guys, and I think this bonus tip is a great one. It's a safe and fun way to strengthen the arm for youth players. It's a fun way and a safe way to strengthen it, and it gives instant feedback. I want to first do a quick plug for 8020baseball.com. Over there, guys, I have a one-of-a-kind coaching package. It's an A through Z coaching program. It took me 6 months, actually a little bit more than 6 months, full time, working from 8 o'clock until about 5 to 6 o'clock each night, Monday through Friday, for over 6 months to put it all together. There is a lot that went into it, and not just the time that went into it there. I took the 33, 34 years of baseball experience that I have and all the wisdom I've collected and all the things I've done out there with the players too, and trainings and things like that, and all the stuff that I've taken in, and I've packaged it together to give you that A through Z blueprint, an A through Z plan that details out everything you need to know and things to avoid on your way to being a more successful coach. The goal of it was more wins, no guessing. Successful baseball done efficiently and enjoyable. And even if you just use one or two of the dozens of resources that are on there, you are going to get your money's worth. I guarantee it. And if you don't like it, there's a trial. If you don't like it, you don't have to commit to it. There's a trial period on there as well, right? I believe in what it's going to do for you. Go ahead, give it a shot. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. I promise. All right, now I'm going to finish with the productive bonus tip. Here we go. A safe and fun way to strengthen the arm of youth players, and we talked about this a little bit, we touched on this a little bit, Nolan Ryan, is as follows. I would have pitching staffs and players throwing a football during their throwing program or during their throwing routine or as part of their conditioning routine. The design of the football gives much clearer feedback than that of a baseball, which that's why it's advantageous, or it has more of an advantage than a baseball, because it gives a clearer feedback to the thrower, an instant and much clearer feedback to the thrower, insofar as a perfect spiral indicates solid throwing mechanics, and a wobbler, a duck, that means the throwing technique was off. A baseball doesn't always have even a baseball that's thrown, or I should say a football that's thrown fairly straight and fairly on target can still have wobble to it. All right, so it's not an efficient throw. And with a baseball, sometimes you throw it to your partner and it goes fairly close to the target, but the baseball spins. It's just the size of it, the weight of it, it's just the way it's designed. It doesn't have that. You don't notice that wobble as much. Now, you see on spin efficiencies and things like that, like on Rapsodo, that's what that's all about. But when you're out there doing throwing programs and stuff, the football gives you instant feedback whether, you add solid throwing mechanics or not. Now, I understand throwing the football is not the same or identical to throwing a baseball. I get that, especially like the fastball. The fastball, you're going to get behind the ball more. And on a football, obviously, you're going to get on the side a little bit more. Adding to the benefit of instant clear feedback, the football weighs 3 times the weight of a baseball. So now you have a weighted ball to throw around into your routine. All right, it's a safe way to throw a weighted ball into your routine. Now, I recommend a couple of these strategies. I recommend throwing the football towards the end of the throwing routine when the arm is good and ready. Number 2, use a youth football for youth players. So use a youth football for youth players. And I'm not saying you just just go to a smaller football just to use a smaller football, but for youth players, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, going out there with an NFL regulation ball is probably not a good idea. So no, throwing a football is not going to make you Nolan Ryan or Max Scherzer, but I believe it can be a productive piece to a pitcher's throwing routine. All right, you guys, this has been Coach Bo. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I do it for you guys. I hope you're getting stuff out of this. I know I've been getting some good feedback. Take it to the field. Take good care of yourself. Bye for now.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Experience.
This is a really good team, and so you have to earn everything you have against them and take opportunities when they present themselves.
Take it to the field.